When we first had issues with cars, we didn't go back to riding horses. We improved the cars because we saw a vision of a better future that brought people together. That is why our focus should be on improving processed foods, not demonizing them. Welcome to the Keto Geek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Keto Geek Podcast. My name is Fahad, and once again, I'm joined by the holy
Corey Ben, or aka The Alchemist. I don't really go by that moniker much anymore. You can just call me Corey.
Corey, the holy alchemist?
Sure.
Okay. Man, our intros are getting sillier by over time. It's getting crazy. Anyway, everybody, welcome aboard. It's been a good time. We're having a lot of fun raising up some controversy while we're at it. Not per se intentionally, it's just happening anyway. We get some interesting feedback on our shows. Life's been good. Finally springtime here. I'm oversaturating people with information from my side. How are you today, Corey?
Pretty good. I'm happy. What can I say? The Instagram stuff is starting to grow on the Energy Pods page, and I think that's a great thing because we have an awesome product. It's called the Energy Pods, and they sponsor us, actually, the Keto Geek Podcast. What are Energy Pods, Fahad?
Energy Pods are made by us here at Keto Geek here in Napa, California. These are these decadent food emulsions, or meal replacement as we now call them, that come in a 2-ounce pack. We use the best ingredients that we can find from across the country. We make our own ghee, and that goes into these energy pods as well. We have spent countless hours figuring out how to make all of this work. We've been at it for 4 or 5 years now. Our product is available in different places, including Amazon. It's on our website. But just to put it simply, it contains a lot of good stuff in there. There's MCTs, there's ghees, there's nuts in there, blanched almonds specifically. And then we have some natural and synthetic. Well, mostly we have natural flavoring components yet.
Yeah.
So, and they come in a completely shelf-stable form. One of the best ways to consume the energy pods is to refrigerate them. Put them in the refrigerator, shove them in there. They'll turn into a beautiful pudding texture.
Agreed. I actually made some good content if you guys want to see the differences between those temperatures. If you go to @energy_pods, plural, on Instagram, that's the Energy Pods page. It's literally all about energy pods. There's nothing else there. Click the highlight reel texture science, and you'll see what the pods look like at the room temperature, what they look like refrigerated, what they look like frozen. And that gives you a good idea and what you may be looking for in a multi-purpose product. So it's really cool. And to give people, I know a lot of people are a little nerdy about those macronutrients. So the macros in those pods, you're going to have anywhere from 27 to 30 something grams of fat, and then 9 to 10 grams of protein, and 3 net carbs. We do use erythritol, and monk fruit is our sweetener, so no added sugar.
Yeah, and it's interesting that our conversation actually is moving a little bit away from macros themselves,
right?
More into the experience of food, as in what makes things something tasty, because a lot of people, they care mostly about how good something tastes. Basically 99% of the population, I would imagine. Don't quote me on that. Most people don't track macros. So the goal here with improving processed foods, which is our vision, is to make sure that the food tastes good. And one of the challenges that we're facing right now is affordability. Our product's expensive, like $9.95 for one energy pods. It's not something that a lot of people can buy. But what our goal is that once you guys, as listeners and customers, buy our product, we can leverage that technology, everything that we learn, into creating a cheaper version or a different version. Maybe give out our energy pod brand to a different country, like let's say, Pakistan, India, China, somewhere else where people cannot afford our product at retail price, which is $9.95. So over there, they can use localized labor, localized infrastructure to use energy pods, and this could be a good food for the future. So that's our goal with our product. So we do need everybody's support. If we have to make the world a better place, we have to invest in a good product. It's very similar to how a lot of people bought Teslas. Not a lot of people can buy Teslas, but what they did buy into was a vision. They said that we want electricity. We don't want to see a lot of gas-powered vehicles on there. Now, I'm not going to argue about gas versus electricity on this podcast, but what my point here is that humanity has the capacity to invest in something they believe in and create a global change, which is why a lot of car manufacturers now have moved on to electric vehicles as well. So that's been our vision as well. So we need your support. Go buy our energy pods, bring them to your life, and together we're a big family, human beings, team humans, and we can make a change in the world. That's what Corey and I live for every single day since we wake up to sleep. So where can people buy energy pods, man?
You can buy them on our website, www.ketogeek.com. They're also available on Amazon. You can search for energy pods. You might find them easier if you go Keto Geek Energy Pods, because we often get confused with K-Cups. The Keurig pods, I suppose you have the coffee in there. So go over there, Amazon, ketogeek.com. If you're local to Napa, though, we are available in 5 stores. Support your small businesses. Over at downtown Napa, we have Board Garden, Jeffrey's General, and First and Franklin. In Upper Valley, we have Sunshine Foods Market, and we have Cal Mart in Calistoga. So go grab them, and while you're at it, leave us a review, please.
If you order today, you'll get them within about 3 days. We do a 2-day shipping. Basically, honestly, it's just the priority shipping that we use, and we just factor it into the cost of the energy pods itself. I would recommend go with the artisan box, and the artisan box contains 2 of each flavor. So you get the chocolate fudge, you get the white chocolate strawberry, and you get the breakfast mocha, and then you also get the pecan coconut. I would say the breakfast mocha is in a league of its own when it comes to flavor and the product itself. I know I'm just saying it, but man, if you haven't had coffee, like the full body flavor of coffee, you need to try the breakfast mocha energy pod.
Yeah, it's different. So when you're making coffee, you're using a water and pressure extraction method. Here we're using slow and methodical grinding and slow and methodical heating, so we're not damaging the volatile compounds of the flavors of coffee that you may destroy with hotter water. But that's why we see people brewing with less than boiling water, of course. But if you really want to experience coffee on a different level,
full body,
try it oil extracted like it is in the energy pod. It is incredible.
Yep, and we're using light roasted coffee beans because the dark roasted, they may taste, the dark roast coffee may taste good when you're sipping it maybe, but when it comes to the energy pods, since energy pods just takes coffee flavor to another level because you're getting everything, all the good and the bad stuff. So if you do a bad roast, energy pods is going to reflect that. So that's why we chose the light roast, because it has a more fruity and coffee and pronounced flavor to it. We've tried it with medium roast, but man, you can't beat light roast. So all the purists who are telling about, hey, coffee's all about the light roast, they're speaking the truth.
We get it.
Yeah, we get it. We get it. We totally get it. Dark roast does not work. It's just too burnt, and you lose the individual flavor aspect, the what makes coffee fruit unique, where it comes from. You lose that in dark roast, but with light roast, you capture that, especially with the fat extraction that we're doing with the energy pods. So go get the energy pods, support a good cause, support good agriculture, and add them to your life. Go out on an adventure, because you're spending so much time cooking and doing so many different things. There's invisible labor involved. So save time. Everybody wins here.
Right.
So let's change the world. And I think that's about it when it comes to energy pods. Or anything else we can talk about? No?
I think we're good. I encourage you all. I know it's not a daily driver item. It's $10 a pod. I understand. Pick a box though, and just grab them when you're on the go. And see how they truly work for you, rather than like trying to fit them into a meal, perhaps. Maybe that's a good way to start with the energy pods to see what the true value is here.
Yep, test the waters. And I think that's about it. So let's go back to our show and explain to people who Mark Haub is. Hopefully I got the last name correct. So just a little bit of a context to this podcast. I wanted to have Mark a few years back. I heard about the Twinkie Diet. Corey, you and I have talked about the Twinkie a lot on this show. We use that as our scapegoat in many different in different shows that we've talked about. So my curiosity has always been to find these unique paradoxes, these people that are pushing the limits and trying to extract knowledge from it. Or they have the knowledge, but they're going into the unknown and coming out with even more growth, or they're substantiating something they already know. Mark is one of those people. He is known for the so-called Twinkie diet. But as you're going to find out, it isn't just about the Twinkies. And what I didn't expect on this podcast was an extreme exploration of how food science connects with health science and the many blind spots that exist in the nutrition. There's a lack of bridge between the nutrition, the health science, and the food science, and interestingly, as Mark would point out, in the agricultural world as well. So what we're trying to do here at Keto Geek is we're trying to connect these dots together so that we can create an infrastructure where everybody can work together. So I was really surprised by this podcast. I learned so much from this show, and you guys will too. So just to give everybody a bit of an introduction, Mark is a professor at Kansas State University, Ph.D. in Exercise Physiology, PostDoc in geriatric nutrition, 15 minutes fame for the Twinkie Diet that appeared on CNN, Fox News, Doctors, NPR, Scottish, British radio, and several local TV and radio programs. He also got some research grants and has some publication in areas of metabolism, body composition, sports nutrition, and diabetes. This is one of the few times where Keto Geek has brought somebody who's in the world of food science and nutrition at the same time. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
You're going to learn some really, really interesting stuff that nobody talks about. You don't get that kind of outlook. So without further ado, Corey, let's go and delve into this show.
One of the stories that I tell is I was a high school athlete, and this came up actually, well, sort of, in one of the last videos I did on YouTube. But I was a high school cross country runner. I grew up on food stamps, so government housing, food stamps. Parents were divorced, and my mom, she was I'm not sure what you know about American history, but she was a minister in the 70s and so ministers were supposed to be men, and she was divorced, so there were few opportunities for her to work. So that's did not grow up in an affluent situation. So as a high school athlete, I didn't understand nutrition. This is my push, is to get food education in schools in K-12 in public education. We have physical education, but we don't have food education. At least it's not required. And so my mom would give me an allowance, a food allowance, and I was supposed to take it and use it for school lunches. I used half of it for school lunches and half of it I kept. And I'm not sure she knows that to this day, but anyway, that's what I did. And so I would undereat at lunch and then go run 4 to 8 miles of cross country in the afternoon, evening. My lunch might consist of an ice cream sandwich, which was 50 cents versus $2. Or I might get 4 rolls, which was about 40 cents, 10 cents a roll. This was back in the 80s. And so I would, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, I'd have like $10-ish to use as, again, and this from a money management perspective, this was great for me. I learned how to manage money and how to, okay, if I do this and this. So on the money side, I was great. On the calorie nutrition side, I was very, very poor. And I didn't know that. And I didn't understand what high energy, the exercise side of things, how my body would break down. But I ended up overtraining my senior year of high school. And it was terrible, but that was a learning experience. And so that's kind of what got me into nutrition and understanding nutrition. I didn't really know what it was, but I knew how important it was. And then fast forward, ran cross country in college. And that's where, so again, an example I used, I used was I would drink a high C type product. It was not high. Basically, it was food coloring, sugar, and water with a little flavoring, fruit flavoring, and it would just be whatever color it was, lime or whatever. That Kool-Aid type product. Drink that all the time. I would eat waffles, whatever. I had cafeteria, and at the time the cafeteria was open. You pay and you get three meals, 3 trips through, all you can eat. So processed foods, processed cereals, waffles. In college, my nutrition did start to improve. And so at that time, within the running community, low fat was huge. And so I followed suit. So I mainly followed a vegetarian type diet in college. With the I guess it was kind of lacto-ovo. I would eat eggs and drink milk for cereal and things like that. But I tried to limit my beef, basically red meat. I would eat fish and tuna occasionally. So that's how I got into the nutrition side. I went to grad school and got a master's degree and Ph.D. in exercise science, exercise physiology, and then did a postdoc in geriatric nutrition. And that's where I really got into some specifics of the science behind nutrition. I was funded. My postdoc was funded by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And so I'm not sure what you alluded to in the intro, but I'll often get targeted by meat eaters. And it's like, dude, nothing. They paid for my postdoc. And in essence, the beef industry paid me $80,000 over 2 years. So for my salary to manage that study. They didn't specifically do that, but
just to sort of interject here, I really don't care about that stuff because I'm more interested, and I think most of the people here, like, that's just the lowest hanging fruit of argument. Like, it's not, you're not, a lot of the times when people bring those sort of conflict of interest in there, it's, I guess, relevant in some ways, but I personally like to know more about what the argument is, steel man someone's argument, and then start to sort of dismiss that. But just saying that, hey, because you're blah, 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 you're affiliated or associated with, that's just too poor of an argument for my likes.
Well, no, and I think it's very superficial. You're just, again, like I said, you're kind of hitting the low-hanging fruit versus addressing the issue and avoiding it. So I did my postdoc, Kansas State University. So I was born in Missouri, but my wife's from Kansas. So we were in Arkansas at the time, which is about 7 hours from my wife's family. And so we said, well, let's get closer to home. K-State had an opening basically in sports nutrition exercise as a faculty member. So I applied. I was fortunate to get the position. We moved up there in 2000, and I taught nutrition exercise types classes it was around 2007. I don't remember the exact year when the class, the Energy Balance class came out, but developed a 2-hour Energy Balance course, and that's where the kind of the project stemmed from. So a background of the project, the kind of the Twinkie Diet issue was at that time, it was 2010, and the dietary guidelines were coming out. And so I was fortunate to see a preview of the dietary guidelines, basically a rough draft. And in it, there was a specific line that said solid fats and sugar are obesogenic. So this gets at the calories in, I don't like calories in, calories out, but CICO is kind of what's thrown around as the concept there. And so I was like, And at that time, I think my BMI was it was like 28, 29. So it was like, I was almost defined as obese. And I said, oh, well, I have a class. There are so many layers to this. This would be a great thing to do for my class. And so at the onset, I thought, I'll just do it for 4 weeks, collect some data pre-post, and share that with the students, and then we'll talk about it in class. Well, my department head at the time got wind of it. It ended up in a school article. So there was a school journalist, student journalist that started it. Then all of a sudden it hit a local paper, and then it got into ABC, one of the ABC internet news releases. And then it blew up once it got out of kind of the realm of Kansas. And so the unfortunate aspect is people tend not to understand the depth of the project, because it touched on supplement use. It touched on, which tends to get avoided. It doesn't talk about economics. I mean, I was spending around $5 a day on food. And not to get too current, but with food prices going up, a question I have, and I actually thought about it this morning based upon some of the comments that were coming from the news, is the current inflation, the current cost, is it going to drive people to eat more processed foods, to a cheaper food option versus maybe some foods that they may have been used to? So maybe they're going to get a hamburger helper versus a homemade casserole, because you can stretch the dollar more, if you will, going that route. So that's kind of how things got to where they are. And kind of as kind of we've talked, there have been people that have addressed it from all sides. The recent discussion that you and I had on Twitter with Dr. Haub kind of touches on that point. And, and my issue with, and I'm not sure what your plans were for this discussion, but I was planning to talk a little bit about that discussion. And I think what doesn't come out in his study was that the processed food eaters ate more calories. We can talk about why they ate more calories, but they weren't equal. And so the processed foods in and of themselves, going back to what I did, didn't lead to the weight gain and the changes that he saw in his study. It was the fact that they ate more calories versus controlling the caloric intake. So anyway.
Just to give everybody a little bit of a backstory on where we're heading right now, is that Dr. Kevin Hall, he is an NIH researcher, and he came up with a study very recently about processed foods that he purported to show over there that they increase energy intake compared to unprocessed foods. I have my issues that I've addressed in the previous podcast, but yes, you're welcome to take the stage here and say what you want to say.
So it's, and that's where people kind of got, and this brings in other perspectives, the Gary Taubes and the issue of carbohydrate and the carbohydrate insulin theory and those kinds of things. But I ate the foods that a lot of people say don't eat because they cause X. And going back to the USDA guidelines, and that statement, I couldn't find it in the dietary guidelines when they officially came out. I like to think that I had an influence on that, but I don't know. But what we eat, when you pare it down, what we eat doesn't necessarily dictate what our physiological metabolic responses are. It tends to be dose, much like toxicology. It tends to be the dose that's the poison, and not necessarily what the dose tends to determine. We can get by eating X amount of Y and not succumb to whatever the negative outcome is.
Okay. And see, that's I want to actually backtrack a little bit, because it also ties in very well with this topic. It's like when you went to you did the Twinkie experiment, and it got all the fame on CNN, Fox News, and etc., all these big places. So my question was that I assume how did that start for you? And then once you're done explaining that, I have some really interesting questions for you regarding, which I think will tie in really well with a processed food diet as well.
Yeah, so there were some interesting opportunities that I had. And here, so I was an associate professor, and this goes back to one of those things where we're not trained for media. This isn't something, even what we're doing here. Most science, STEM PhDs, faculty are not trained to do interviews, to do media, any of that stuff. And so I found myself looking back, these are the things, hindsight's 2020. I would do some things differently, but I would answer questions. I wouldn't drive interviews. And so so in other words, there were some shows that I ended up getting on that were either politically charged or they were trying to prove a point on their end. And then they were using me to get their point across. I didn't understand that as a faculty member. I was just, well, sure, I'm happy to talk about what I did. They would ask a question, I would answer, versus me trying to get at, okay, what are you really wanting from, Fox News isn't going to spend 5 minutes on me just to figure out they're using me for something. Same thing, Good Morning America. This is my biggest issue with this is, so Good Morning America, two people, Good Morning America, Dr. Oz. They used me without me being able to say anything. And so everything the audience heard came from them. I was not able to make a statement, to answer questions, to defend myself. And Dr. Oz was the worst at it. There were some issues there where if I could potentially, I got to watch myself here, but I could potentially maybe do some slander libel issues based upon some of the things he said without giving me the opportunity to respond. I don't know if there's any legal case in that, but he did not give me a fair shake. But the doctor's TV show did. They flew me out and had me on and asked me questions, and I appreciated that. Because they actually, go to the source. Let's talk to this person versus making assumptions about what happened or why it happened and things like that. And so anyway, so from a media perspective, I learned a lot about myself and a lot about some life issues. Because fame, for example, I was pretty popular for about a month. And as a human, I kind of got wrapped up in that a little bit. And so it's like, I had to talk myself, hey, I'm not doing this for that. I'm doing this to help educate people and that kind of thing. So there were times in which I wouldn't take interviews like this because I needed to back out. I was getting too wrapped up into wanting to be here in front of a screen. I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And, as humans, man, that's tough. It's tough. So we just saw some issues, not to bring up the fame issue, but the Oscars the other night, brings to light some of these types of issues and where people are. And as people's careers change in industries, popularity, I don't know what drove some of that, but I think fame had something to do with it being in the limelight, whether that be the Oscars or the two people involved in the issue that was viral, or maybe still be viral. So anyway, so that's kind of where I was. And it came basically at the end of a semester, so I had time, because on an academic calendar, this was Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so at the end of the semester, I had time to do things. And I will also make this public, after that was done, Coca-Cola approached me and I gave some follow-up interviews that they paid for to go around and just do I shouldn't say local, it was satellited interviews to local, regional, like news or whatever broadcast things that they would do. So I was paid by Coca-Cola, but they didn't influence much like here. You're letting me talk. They let me talk. There's nothing that I could, like here, I could say, you're open to me saying ketogenic diets suck or ketogenic diets are great. And I was able to do the same thing regarding processed foods and those kinds of things. And so there's that. there are a lot of people that are in the low carb community that claim this was all set up by Coca-Cola. It was not.
Yeah. This is interesting.
I did not have any relationships with them prior to. I've been Freedom of Information Act twice. I'd like to say I've been FOIA'd the most at Kansas State University, but I don't know. I don't know that. But in both times, they came away with nothing.
Well, that's interesting here that you mentioned it. Sorry to sort of break here, that you got slandered on some of the mainstream, but when some private company came up and started to push you into different channels, that was much more freeing and you weren't influenced, when most of the time people think it's the other way around.
Right.
That is very interesting. Very interesting.
Well, and here's the personal thing that I don't think a lot of people understand. As a faculty member and as a scientist, and I learned this, I don't know if I learned it the hard way, but it was a rough way. I guess maybe the best way to put it. We don't really have an opportunity to take financial advantage of our knowledge outside of teaching and some of those things. So, for example, a physician can write a book about whatever and make money on the side for that. But if a scientist does that and promotes that, all of a sudden you have a conflict of interest. You're selling out. You're doing these kinds of things. And so what I learned was, I can't to maintain my integrity as a scientist. When people come with that type of money and affiliate with a brand, it's best just to say no. And so it limits some of the extra financial opportunities that we might be able to take advantage of as faculty, to say, okay, here's a sponsorship I could do, but if I do it, I'm losing some integrity. And so anyway, so that's kind of one of the things I don't think a lot of people realize, is that in order to maintain our status as a scientist and maintain our respect within the scientific community, sometimes we have to say no to some financial advantages that would be good personally, but bad professionally.
I think this is very interesting and a very important topic here. But personally, we're still a really baby company. So for me personally, it's all about what kind of value can we bring to the world. Yep. That's always been my question, disregarding conflict of interest or conflict of, I guess this would be a conflict of ideology in some ways. So that's the parameters that I use. The problem that I see with the masses is that we lack the tools, or most of us lack the tools to distinguish what is good information from bad information, because it is so sensationalized, or as I call it, processed information. So that, I think, is a huge problem. I think the thing that the low carb and keto community did somewhat right was an attempt to figure out or quantify something or challenge certain sciences. That I respect that. But the problem is that most of the keto and low carb community has now replaced it with more ideological brainwashing. Like, for example, the whole ancestral stuff and all of these other things that are more of a repackaged appeal to nature fallacy rather than something that can aid in the growth of our knowledge. That's why a lot of these diets and movements implode on themselves over time, because they're more focused on adhering to an ideology rather than empowering its individuals to learn and grow.
Yeah.
We might have go ahead.
That's a fantastic summary of and that goes for all kind of diets. They work because of X, not because of Y, not because of, for what I did. It worked because I eliminated foods from my diet and eliminated calories from my diet that I was getting from other things. It's not what I ate that was miraculous. I say miraculous, I use that term loosely. That wasn't a miracle, but just because it's based on thermodynamics. But the diets that people choose, they work because they have found a way to limit intake that leads to excess energy intake. But then typically what you may have experienced, what you may have talked about in other shows, is sometimes they will sell supplements because they know that diet, that lifestyle, is deficient in something that's essential.
Yeah. And my conflict of interest, just to add a little bit here for viewers and yourself as well, is that I make these products called energy pods. And for me, if I can continue improving it somehow, or somehow making it taste better, make it have positive health outcomes, that's great. If I have to bring sugar back in, I will do that. If I have to add seed oils back in, yes, I will do that. If it's beneficial, if I like to look at it the global picture, and I think we were talking about it at the start of the show. The problem with the ketogenic diet is that the cost of goods are insane. That makes it really not an affordable thing for the rest of the world, where people have to rely on global staples such as rice, such as wheat, and all of these kind of things, and potatoes. And those are straight up carbohydrates. So my goal would be to learn from someone like you, like, how did you make something work? Like the Twinkie experiment that you did, some people might have heard of it already, was really unique. It's a paradoxical sort of approach. It is based in science, but at the same time, everybody likes to say ultra-processed foods are bad. Sweet ultra-processed foods, oh my God, now you're talking about spawns of hell going inside your body. So, but the question here, like, we've used your example, the Twinkie diet, in our previous podcasts as well to basically dismiss so many different arguments. So, but I have some really interesting questions that I don't know if you've answered somewhere, but I want to know, like, like, were you tracking calories when you were doing this sort of diet?
Yeah. So on that note gets really interesting. And so again, it's one of those things, a personal thing that I learned. And so so I set it at 1,800 calories, and this is something that often gets lost in the description, in the summary, when somebody takes what I did and tries to explain to somebody else. I didn't eat more than 1,800 calories. There were days I ate 1,500 calories. So I didn't go over 18, because a lot of people think that, well, if you ate 1,800 calories a day, you shouldn't have lost as much weight as you did. I didn't say I ate 1,800 calories. I said I did not eat more than. And so again, some of the nuances of this project kind of get lost in translation sometimes when people explain it to others. I think in the whole 10 weeks, I may have eaten 5 Twinkies. And 2 or 3 of those were for Good Morning America. And so it's not that I don't like Twinkies, it's just that wasn't a preferred option. And so what I did was I would basically snack. It was basically an intermittent fasting. If you want to break it down into what I did, it was I would eat about 400 calories 4 times a day. And so the interesting part, though, was there were a few days when I would get to, it'd be like 7 o'clock at night, 7 p.m., and I'd go to bed at 10, we'll say 10, sometimes between 9 and 11. And I'd be like, I don't eat my next snack. I can lose more weight faster. And it was internal. I mean, it was self-talk, and I was like, holy shoot.
You can curse word, use anything you want.
That was a very, and I still, right now, my hairs are standing up on end, because I understand what eating disordered people go through. And it's like, that was really bizarre thought. And I think it happened twice. And it was one of those things like, oh, that's something I got to watch. And so that was one of the things too. Those people reached out. I probably got 10 to 15 thank yous from those who were recovering from, who either had recovered or recovering from eating disorders. Because their thought is, I can't eat that food because it's going to be dangerous to me. Even though I want it, people tell me, don't eat that because it'll make you fat.
So when you were on this Twinkie diet, what was it like? Was it just Twinkies? And I assume you took something else, Twinkies, water. What about coffee and vitamins?
Yeah. Caffeine was a staple. So it was either espresso of some sort or Diet Mountain Dew. That was basically the two options. And then I would have, so what I built the menu around was, if a food was ever demonized or slated as being unhealthy, I put it on my menu. So meat on my menu, because meat's bad, saturated fat. So solid fat, saturated fat's bad. Cakes, those kinds of things. Whole fat milk, bad, because it's, you got milk fat in there. So cream, that'll cause atherosclerosis and all sorts of things. So, wherever, so I would use low carb descriptions of things, as well as low fat, to basically to kind of use some of the ammunition of those groups and say, well, if they claim that this is not good, then I'm going to eat it.
Yeah. So it wasn't per se like an all Twinkie sort of diet. It was a combination of everything that was demonized by the health community. You just consumed it, but but you maintained them under or at or under 1,800 calories, roughly speaking, and that was how you were able to lose weight. And how long was this experiment for you?
10 weeks. So it started out. See, this is the competitive person in me. I should have let go a while ago, but it was about 4 weeks in, and I got in this conversation with somebody, and I'm sure you appreciate some of these things, because it comes out in the research all the time, especially the randomized clinical trials. There'll be something that says, well, that wasn't long enough. That doesn't prove anything. And so it was like 4 weeks in, and I was talking to somebody, and they said, well, that doesn't prove anything. What's 4 weeks? I'm like, here are data that show my cholesterol, everything else decreased, my weight decreased, everything else. That's not enough for you? Okay, then I'll just continue. And so it was originally supposed to be 4 weeks. It ended up being 10. I stopped it at Thanksgiving because, it's Thanksgiving. And so it ended up being 10 weeks. And at about week 7, I think, I increased it to 2,000 calories, my limit. So I started adding back in. I have 2 boys, and so they were 4 and 7 at the time. And so I didn't want to deal with questions at the dinner table of, why does dad get to eat a candy bar and I don't? So I would eat like a can of corn, or a can of vegetables, or a tomato, something that obviously they didn't really like that much. And so they wouldn't see me eat the other stuff. But then I started adding just family meals at dinner, just to make things easier. And this is an issue a lot of families face when somebody has to change a diet aspect. Does one person eat by themselves? Everybody else eats different, or do you eat like the one person, or do you have a mix of that? So I got to experience that as well.
That's really interesting. But it's kind of like, I would say personally myself, even right now, I would say I'm on a probably like a processed, ultra processed. I guess the definition is so vague, and different groups of scientists are trying to figure out what they're talking about. But I would consider my current diet to be just like processed, ultra processed. And what's funny is that if you look around at the label, if you understand some chemistry, you realize that some of these so-called ultra processed foods are pretty good when it comes to their nutritional composition. And even something that might be considered a candy bar might be pretty nutritious in its own way. Like, for example, dark chocolate is really, really good. And nut butters are really, really good, and those kind of foods. And I would say that if Twinkies got fortified with some micronutrients and maybe a little bit more protein, we might be onto something.
Well, I completely agree with you. And one of the studies I use is this, and I need to and maybe I'll find it and send you the link, and maybe you already have it, but one of the examples I use in classes is some studies that is from France that looked at blended spinach and the amount of vitamin A you get out of spinach, whether it's blended or not. And you get more vitamin A out of processed food, out of processed spinach. And so when you make the smoothie with spinach in it or whatever other leafy vegetable, you break down the cell walls and you get more of the good stuff, the nutrition, the chlorophyll, those kinds of things that are inside, and they're more bioavailable. We can't, and I think you brought it up in one of your videos about we process food. We are food processors. But if we pre-process food, we can even get more nutrients than mastication and digestion can provide.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll wait.
So that's my issue with demonizing processing is what are we really talking about? Are we talking about nutrition, or are we talking about palatability, cost, all these other things which maybe we have difficulty controlling? My big issue right now, the thing that I really struggle with, are the free chips at Mexican restaurants. When we go as a family, my preference is not to go to those because I know I have issues eating those. You put a bowl of chips in front of me, man, it takes effort to put them away. So I tend not to eat any just because I know it's the whole Doritos thing of just, I can't, don't eat just one, we'll make more, whatever their slogan is. It's like, yeah, man, you're right. So anyway.
So here's what for the last 2-3 years, we've been focusing on a concept called food architecture. And I think someone like you might be able to sort of relate more so to it than most of the other people, like moving away from diets and keto and all those things and getting more into the nitty gritty and the technical. This started off with me there's a guy called Gabor Ardosi. He showed up to our podcast and he started to talk about how different processing can have an impact on different kinds of foods. And that evolved into a conversation into me reading a book literally about food, the architecture or food structure, which is by a bunch of scientists in in New Zealand, University of Massey, something like that. And so and then I started to look at some of the research that was coming from a bunch of food nutrition scientists from Infogest. I don't know if you've heard of those people. They're in Europe.
Yeah.
So I started to look into that. Then I started to look into some of the research and started to realize that maybe that might be one of the key players in what is going on over here. And because of how the problem isn't that processed foods is lacking in nutrients, the most nutrient dense foods on this planet are processed foods. My multivitamin pill is, you can't go more nutrient dense than that. But if you're using mass over volume, which is the density, which is what's used in calculating density across every scientific field, then by that definition, by proxy, processed foods are more nutrient dense, hands down. So what I started to realize was that creating foods that basically rapidly nuke your small intestines seem to be a little bit more on the problematic side. But at the same time, I think that's where I'm at this moment, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yep.
And then I started to get into some really interesting, curious cases. Like, for example, people think potatoes are the most satiating foods on the planet. And then you look at what's going on at a microstructural level, all that kind of stuff. So things get really interesting over there. But what's interesting, just to circle back at your sort of experiment, when you ate a lot of these foods, how was your hunger like? And what about liquid calories, which are known to be relatively notorious in many studies?
Yeah, so the liquid calories tended to be mainly from milk. I think I may have had 1 or 2 sugar sweetened beverages, not that many. I don't like them. Now I take that back. I do like them with certain spirits added to them, but Not to promote any one particular product, like whiskey and cola would be an opportunity where I might drink the full version. I don't like Diet Coke with those products. So sugar sweetened beverages, it's one of those things where that doesn't really resonate with me. I like diet soda. I do like that better than the original. So from a beverage perspective, I think I would have espresso with cream, like a breve espresso with cream. So though I was getting a few calories from that, but most of the calories were from cakes, cookies, and processed meats, hot dogs, things like that. But so that's where I learned to stagger. I didn't have meals. I had snacks. And so that's how so again, going back to the intermittent fasting thing, instead of the intermittent fasting basically being one window in the day to eat or two windows in the day to eat, I had like four, but they were just small. I wouldn't leave the window open. I was like, I can have this many calories in this window of time. And so the beauty of it too, going back to your issue, is shelf life. The shelf life of these products is phenomenal. So I didn't have to, if I would have used fresh fruit, putting it in a bag can be problematic, if it gets smushed or, whatever. And so carrying these things around is easy. And so it ended up being something that, I could put a box of X in my desk, and that could get me through. And most people would say, well, that's one day. Well, that would be maybe 2 days or 3 days for me. And I could just pull from that. I wouldn't have to worry about spoilage. Wouldn't have to worry about freshness. So again, the food science aspect of it, they do a good job of making it safe, making it palatable, and making it available. Now, like everything else, with people, when you restrict your diet, and I think this happens across the board with most plans, is it gets monotonous after a while, which is why I think sometimes we as humans would have a really difficult time eating a dog food type diet where we ate the same product all the time. And so as long as I was able to maintain my menu, I really didn't have a problem. It was like, no, I'm not interested in that. It's not on my menu. It's not on my green list, if you will. So I wouldn't look at it. So anyway, that's kind of and then the beauty of kind of what I did is one of the other issues that came up was social events. And I'm not sure what the low carb community and how vegans and all these other things, how they interact. But the nice thing about having a kind of a junk food diet is at social events, I can pick and choose and look normal. I wouldn't have to worry about, I can't have anything here. Or something like, well, I'm gluten-free. Do you have any gluten-free options? And then have the host or hostess feel shame because, I didn't fix anything for so-and-so. And so it kind of allowed me to kind of eat the way I wanted to eat, but do so in a way that was, people would look and say, all you're going to have is cookies? Yeah, I ate before. So I could manage those social events without them feeling guilt for not providing XYZ. And for me getting, I know that in such and such time I can eat again. So whatever I'm doing now, isn't going to affect me that much.
Yeah. So Corey and I, who host the podcast with me right now, we've lost our fear of food and we embrace practically every social occasion. Like, we're not afraid of carbohydrates. We're not afraid of fat. We're not afraid of protein. None of that stuff. We just enjoy the experience of food and lift heavy weights and because we intuitively understand a lot of these concepts at a very deeper level. At least we think we do. So yeah, that's the most important thing that I think people miss out on, is you get a lot more flexibility once you moved away from all the so-called unprocessed food diet. And the problem with the so-called unprocessed food diet is it is usually followed by instructions on how to process food at home, meaning recipes, right, which involves invisible labor. So there's that aspect of it people seem to negate and ignore. I think this will be the future of how people are going to eat. It's inevitable because it saves time and it gives people more opportunities, gives you freedom. For example, you could open up a box of anything that is tasty, that is convenient, and could be on the top of a mountain. You don't have to be locked indoors. You could be a gamer who can just open up something and just chow down and go back to doing gaming. You could be a YouTuber, influencer, whoever you are. It's just the challenge here I see is how do you implement it to your lifestyle to get results? Which is where we're not at, because a lot of the diet communities are way too busy demonizing the very same foods that are going to be the solution for the future. And we'll look back at this time and realize that we created dogmatic diet camps rather than evolve the conversation further. One of my biggest gripes is that we talk about educating the people about chemistry, about food science, a lot of these things, and then as soon as they graduate, we just tell them, go eat some natural food. Come on. We're educating people for them to go back and do these literature of worshipping of the past of some sort. So that's where my gripe comes in, and I realize, and then it's just like Corey and I just get totally berserk. We get angry about it. So
no, and
go ahead.
And that's a great point, and that's, I'm fortunate now. My teaching assignment just changed this past year, in which I teach. So I teach a food science class to future healthcare providers, in essence, whether they be dietitians or physicians or dentists, whatever their path ends up being. So most of them are, I'd say 80% are going to go into healthcare. And so one aspect is what I've seen, and you just touched on it, is this gap between food science, agriculture, and health. And the health folks don't understand agriculture. They don't understand agronomy. They don't understand how the food gets to their grocery store. Most nutrition programs teach from the grocery store to the plate. They don't teach the process of how it gets there. And so then you get into this aspect of, well, Whole Foods, et cetera, is better. And because they don't understand food science. And so I think you're doing the hard work, and it's not easy. And then the agriculture folks don't understand nutrition and health, and that's the other side of that gap, right? And so the corn producers are just, hey, I just want to produce more corn. Is there something you can do to your corn to make it more nutritious? What if you go with the multicolored ears of corn to get more of those phytochemicals into the diet? But no, we have, so instead corn is yellow. And so nothing against yellow corn, but, there's opportunities for getting other phytochemicals in the food supply if you grow different varieties of corn.
I think we touched a little bit on the last podcast with Nick about this too, that human beings seem to gravitate towards sensationalism and rapid dogmatic systems, I would say. We easily just radicalize ourselves because it gives some sort of a self-validation. So instead of asking why or how, it is much more easier to be a narcissist and just push your own ideology onto other people. I can see how many food scientists, when I was looking online on finding food scientists at all to follow on Twitter so I could learn or engage with them, I realized that the loudest mouth or loudest voices on social media are people who easily radicalize people. Me against something big. That's the easiest one. That's the underdog story, the underdog narrative, the hero with 1,000 faces sort of narrative, where one person, I am the underdog, food companies are evil, anybody who uses that sort of technology, bad person, so forth. You got to take the big XYZ down. So that is a problem. I mean, I'm not going to say that everybody's a saint in that regards, but there needs to be a conversation between the consumers and the food companies. And I do think that food companies also need to evolve a bit further and start looking at the nutrition argument as well. Beyond that, I honestly don't have the answers to all of this. We're doing our own podcast. We try to bring guests on there. We try to keep some engagement. But it is a tough battle, man. Like when I started Keto Geek, I thought maybe we could use some good science and combine food science. We could combine nutrition science together. But man, a lot of this is a one-way street. People are more than happy to impose, but it's very difficult to say, hey, maybe you might be wrong on this topic. Could you have a discussion? Nope. Impose. And what do you think modern or future food scientists or your students, what can they do to navigate these waters?
Well, I think it's my overall thing with science in general is having these types of discussions and listening versus, and you nailed it, the narcissism, and this gets back to personal selfishness. I'm right. I need to prove myself versus how can I best serve? Well, you're doing it. How can I best serve my community and the world by listening and adapting and moving and providing things that can help? It may be we may need to get here and we're here, but doing this step is getting us closer to that. I'm more interested in taking small steps closer than, all right, we need to go right here. And that's kind of what Mark Bickman did with his, he was anti-fast food, and, he went and I don't know if he created or bought into one of the food delivery companies and ended up going bankrupt because he realized he couldn't make it financially. Nobody would buy the product. It was too expensive to eat the way he claimed people should eat. And so it's one of those things where I think taking small steps and then reevaluate. Are we better than we were? If not, be willing to say, you know what, we were wrong. This is something that maybe we should readopt and reintegrate. And so it's like the processed food thing. Okay, if you compare, let's use your product. You compare your product, and maybe it comes down to, and you mentioned it, density. I think we've gotten too wrapped up into macronutrient density versus including micronutrients. And I think that's a responsibility, in my opinion, on higher education and how we've gotten away from teaching micronutrient metabolism. I just had a conversation with a student 2 weeks ago, a graduate student, and she was debating, should she take micronutrient metabolism? I told her, yes. I know you don't want to. Most people don't. It's it's food chemistry. Who wants to learn food chemistry? Not many people. Especially on the health side, they want to learn the health aspects of XYZ. And I said, if you take this course, you're going to be this far ahead of 80% of the people, because most people are like you. They don't want to know the ring structures and what differentiates an omega-6 from an omega-3. They don't want to learn that. Just tell me what I need to know. And versus kind of understanding and knowing it and understanding, why something may be more beneficial from a neurological perspective than something else. And it tends to revolve around the micronutrients and not the macronutrients, unless the macronutrient is a long chain fatty acid.
Yep. And, could be such there's so much to excavate. Like the entire food, like every food product is just such a beautiful concoction of chemistry that needs to be appreciated. One day my dream is that when people go shopping, instead of people saying this is natural, unnatural, organic, they flip the label and they'll look at it. Oh, this is this chemical. Little Jimmy, what does he think about this chemical? What does it do? Like, is this a coloring agent? Does it something that gives a flavor perception? Is it something that gives aroma? Does it wear multiple hats? Like, that's the kind of, I think, intellectualism that we need to foster a newer generation of inquisitive and curious minds in our society. So yeah, I think you're onto the right track over here. It's just that we do need to get over this hurdle where everybody needs to be on this page of not demonizing processed foods. Instead, they need to say, we need to improve processed foods. How can we improve? Go ahead.
And that's my issues. I did what I did to try to improve and advance our knowledge and our understanding of how food affects us. Nothing more, nothing less. People say, well, you tried to prove that this, and no, I did not. Here are our data, and you know, people say, oh, that's anecdotal, that's n equals 1. The interesting part is, though, they are still data, and when I bring them up to people, they don't have an answer. So that must mean they're impactful. You know, the prime example is, and this goes back to our recent discussion with Kevin, is if I ate ultra-processed foods and they lead to weight gain, how did I lose weight? That's a very basic question. And then when you get into that argument, there's no answer. If it gets into the whole logic and philosophy, of which I'm not an expert, but it gets into that whole thing of having arguments and using logic to say, okay, well then is it really the processing? No. If you have too much processed foods, okay, I'll deny that, or I'll accept that. But if it is what we eat, then what we eat should always lead to this outcome. But most of the time, it doesn't, or it doesn't do it in the magnitude that it's purported to do it.
Yeah, there's many issues with this notion of pointing a bullseye. Like the first, of course, like we talked about, is the appeal to nature fallacy right off the bat. Like, and then you start to see undertones. You could literally make assumptions about, hey, are these all scientists just hating on food companies? Do they? It's just like, are you guys just like, I don't know, this may sound a little mean, but did you guys never get hired by food companies? I'm just kidding, but no. Anyway, but I just think that there's a bit of a problem here where we do need better quantifications and yardsticks. That is absolutely, I think, the heart of this problem. And just to circle back, one of the claims that people make about food and hyperpalatability is a big issue, which I take as I think that's absolutely false in that sense. Because we know from studies that I've mentioned in the past that there's something called sensory specific satiety. You go to grandma's, no matter how, grandma's lunch, dinner buffet, or you go anywhere, you're going to get bored out of it. The problem with Kevin Hall's study was that it's literally a buffet. So of just a lot of different stuff. It's hard to tease out something from that. Well, and we did a study. It ended up not getting published because we couldn't get enough subjects, in which we did, people would come in, have a breakfast, is a fiber study, come in and have breakfast, and then they would have a standard lunch. And we had 2 people, and I think we had 10. So 2 out of our 10 people that and these are people with diabetes, we had plate cleaners. And I was like, we were given one guy, so we would weigh what was left. So we were trying to give them more than what they would eat so we could measure. But whatever we gave him, he would clean his plate. And I was just like, you gotta be kidding. It was my first experience with that type of response. So his cue to stop was if the plate was clean or not. There's no satiety aspect of it because he was eating twice as much food because we would just keep putting food out. And so it was an interesting, so going back to the buffet thing, and this gets back into Brian Wansing stuff, and regardless of what you think about the quality of the science that he did, just because of some of the outcomes and accusations and errors that were made. But it really gets into some things other than the food, the environment, those types of things may lead to increased or decreased intake depending upon other cues outside of just the food. That's true. And we delved a little bit into it where I think some people think it's food addiction while we were covering this one paper that was written by, what's his name? Dr. Mattis of Purdue Nutrition. Yeah, and he and his crew did a systematic, sort of like a more of a review paper rather than just like it's like what does carbs, fats, and proteins do, sort of that. And we were talking about food addiction versus eating addiction. And it seems like if there is something to that, it seems more into like the eating addiction rather than one specific food per se. There is some legitimacy to that, it seems. But yeah, man, it's crazy. The only concern I usually hold for environmental interventions, and same with the processing as well, that is the practicality of that intervention. You can't force people into gulags or shove them into concentration camps, as crazy and dark as that sounds. You have to work with the environment that you have here to the best of your abilities. Now, that would probably translate into creating better processed foods. They have to taste good as much as you don't want, as much as even if you do come up with the solution that bland foods are the solution, it's not going to work because people want tasty food. So I do think that instead, I don't understand why we don't have studies in which people who do go on a sort of like a processed, convenient diet and make it work, and how we can understand that and duplicate as much of that into the populace. Has something like that ever been done outside of certain clinical studies, those low-calorie studies that are done in those weight loss clinics? I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But outside of that, go ahead.
Yeah, part of it's just, so, and this is something, this is what you're talking about is a huge problem scientifically. And what I mean by that is, if you think about, I'll focus on the United States because that's all I really know. I don't know I know there are labs in other countries that do this kind of, Cicero down in Australia. I know there's some other groups that do this. So it's not that. But when you think about the number of programs that do this kind of research, you look around the United States. So you mentioned Purdue. A faculty member there was my postdoc advisor. You can almost count on your hands maybe 10 labs that would be able to do the kind of work you're talking about, that have the experience to do that. And then it's, okay, who's going to fund it? How's it? The university's not. And so you got to get money for that. And then you get at, because this gets at the bigger issue too, of if you take away all the industry funded research in nutrition, what do you have left? Not much. I mean, you have some of Kevin Hall's stuff that's funded by NIH and USDA, but that's what, 10% maybe of the intervention studies. And so the industry funds most of those. And so then, and on top of that, then you have the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board, which looks at ethics. What they might pose is a question: Are you harming the person by doing a study like this? Because there's research out there that shows that processed foods are harmful. And so then will the ethics committee that represents the university sign off on a study like that, a study like I did, if there are data and papers that show that infer doing what we're talking about doing is harmful to people?
Oh man, this is crazy. So the more you sort of push this NOVA classification, you're actually limiting the research further. What the hell, man? Holy shit, this is just crazy. So you can't even do studies anymore. That's like putting like a chastity lock on studies.
Well, so the issue, you kind of can't. So this came up with the IRB issue came up with me a few years ago. We were wanting, a company came to us. This was a beverage company looking at basically an energy drink. And the IRB was like, energy drinks have a bad name. So they didn't want to sign off on it because we didn't have evidence to prove that this would or would not cause harm to the participants. And so they were like, we need some data to show that this is safe stuff to pursue, because we don't want to get into a legal issue of potentially harming somebody because of an energy drink.
We had Dr. Julianne McClements show up to our podcast. He he's done a lot of research on in food science and nanostructures, I think. Mm-hmm. And so what was interesting, he's mentioned that the profit margins on a lot of these foods are not that high, as much as everybody likes to blame them. Is there legitimacy to that? I don't know the insides of a lot of the food stuff.
Yeah, it depends on what it is. And a lot of things. So you look at price differences. And what I am more familiar with is brand and non-branded things. And the reason why branded foods are so expensive is marketing. And so you look at a price difference between a cereal by a branded company versus non-branded. It's like $1. It's like, why would I pay so-and-so $1 more for the same product? Well, they're putting it out there to market it so that you'll buy it. The profit margin's probably the same, but they're investing more in putting that brand and that logo in front of your face versus the non-branded, the grocery store brand, the generic brand. It's just like drugs too. You get the brand, whoever invested the most in creating the product kind of gets first dibs at the profits from that. But the profit margins are not that much. And the other aspect too, and this gets into the agriculture side of when costs are incurred. And if you listen to ag radio, which I don't know if you do, any of your viewers, listeners do, but you'll hear talking about the cost of corn, the cost of wheat, the cost of soy, the cost of cattle, and their futures markets. So they're paying prices now with the thought that this is what it's going to cost down the line. And so they're not paying, it's not a current thing. So that's why sometimes grocery store costs don't change, like with the whole thing that's going on in Ukraine and wheat in Russia and those kinds of things. They don't change right away because the market hasn't been hit by the fluctuation in supply. And so what was coming out in, what are we in? We're in April, I guess now. The cost of April wheat was several months ago.
Yeah.
And so it'll change. The cost will be incurred later. And you may see some of that on your end with some of your supplies.
We've been hit with inflation pretty bad with our stuff. Like anything that is like plastics, something that sticks like a glue of some sort, anything that involves those have gone up. Our ingredient costs have, like for example, MCT oil is one of the ingredients that we use, and it's practically doubled in its cost. Wow. It's kind of crazy. And for us as a small business, I mean, our prices are higher. We're able to absorb some of it. But at the same time, I can feel that a lot of other businesses will have to really cut it short, and I hope it works out really well for them. But I assume this is going to get a little bit more worse over time, right?
Well, yeah, I think, yes. I'll just say yes for numerous reasons. But the other aspect, I applaud you for what you're doing because you're trying to do a good thing for the right reason. An issue that, as I'm sure you experience, is big companies, they can wait it out. They have resources. They can shift things where you're invested in this market and you have everything. You don't have a way to say, hey, I'm going to leverage some of this or sell stock or do all those other things to float the company and just outlast everybody. And so the smaller companies are like, oh, I can't keep up. I'm out. And then, so those market shares then go to that larger company. And is that fair? I don't know. It's not fair from a practical sense, but it is what, it's kind of how markets go sometimes. And so I applaud you for what you do. I applaud you for using American products as often as you can and being ethical about the things you do. So kudos to you.
Yeah. So anything else that you want to cover over here? Have we pried some leaves? I have some questions we didn't even get into. So anything else you want to talk about?
No, and this is kind of one of those things that typically happens is I was on Lane Norton's program maybe a year ago or so, maybe longer ago than that. And yeah, it's these things branch out into a lot of different things. And you'd mentioned before kind of my current situation, and I'm grateful for it's literally changed my life for the better. Granted, nobody wants to get cancer, but it's helped me kind of recalibrate, recenter, refocus on doing the things that I find more personally valuable than kind of, all right, I was given another day, let's throw it away. And so trying to be more, taking time to be more, or treating time more preciously than maybe what I was before. So
when did you first find out?
In October, I suffered a seizure in the garage. And so I don't know if you can see it on your camera, but there's this Harry Potter-like scar on my, it was right before Halloween. So that was my boy said, hey, you should go as Harry Potter. So that led me to the emergency department, the local emergency department, ended up getting an MRI and ended up having surgery. They found a tumor. So the fortunate aspect is if I hadn't had that, they wouldn't have found it, and it would still be present. But the fact that, and I just saw my oncologist not too long ago, and I told him it's a miracle that at the end of January, I had surgeons drilling in my skull, and I'm here today, and fairly, people can debate how cognizant I am or not, but the fact that medicine has advanced in a way that people can go in and remove tissue in the brain and people can live through it and function, it's amazing. And so it's helped me kind of recenter, refocus, and kind of prioritize things potentially better in my life and not take things for granted as much as I did.
Corey and I were talking about it a day ago when we were talking about having you on this podcast, and we're thinking that, every day could be different and you never know what to expect. And in this life of so much unpredictability, it is our human cognition, our science, our growth, our understanding that brings some sort of sense to it. And it creates further regularities that we can rely on that give us an even better experience in life. And it sort of went back to the conversation of the whole processed food. Like, we have a tool that can be so customized. Like, when we look at our product, when we look at our energy pods, we see a cup, we see possibilities. What can you do with a cup? What can you put in there that can give an experience to people? Or maybe help them as a human being in their health or their journey or whatever they're trying to do. Why can't we have a society where we have that embedded into us? Let's grow together. Let's make the lives of other human beings better. Because we've done so much. We've improved. We've created treatments. Why not just take it away into this domain as well? It will be so much helpful if we just fundamentally change how we think about this. Let's learn. When we see food labels, let's see what we can make, how we can improve that, how we can make it better. What does anything do? So that's what we were thinking about for a huge portion of yesterday, especially when we looked on your Twitter and we found out your battle with cancer. That's just a stark reminder that, you don't know what can happen, and we need to become better. We need to learn. We need to create experiences. So how was it for you after that point?
I had surgery January 20th at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And, it was an interesting experience. So I'm fortunate to be able to teach future healthcare providers. This was my first experience in healthcare. I had stitches twice in my life. So I had to go to the emergency room. They just put stitches in. Never went under the knife. Never had any major issue. And so this was my first experience kind of being exposed to that, and just a phenomenal experience. Some good, some not as good. But till January, so from basically November, over 2 months, November through, I guess, through January, my thought was, based upon the information that I had been given as a patient, that they would go in. It was benign. They'd go in, take it out, done. But when they did a follow-up assessment, like, oh, no, that's not stage 2, it's stage 3. So you're gonna need radiation, chemo, and the whole 9 yards. It's like, oh, all right. But so the journey, it gets back at your specific point of, and I actually had a conversation with my department head yesterday, and people, until I didn't understand. I am a reflection of somebody who is truly ignorant of the cancer community. Even though I talk about cancer and those kinds of things in some classes, I talk about it superficially. But until you're a patient, I think sometimes you enter that community, it's a whole different level of understanding and appreciation. And so when I go to radiation treatments and I see the waiting room, it is a very humbling experience, because I know there's some people, they may not be here next year. I'm fortunate. My outlook, my prognosis is very bright. It looks like I have 20-ish years to go. Obviously, that can get cut short by anything. And the flip side of that is, I know a lot of cancer patients who get angry and frustrated. And we just had a family friend who died of a heart attack at the age of, I'm going to say he's 51. I don't know exactly how old. My age. His wife was out of town. They didn't get to say goodbye. And so I'm like, how can I complain by having extra time here to help people? I could be angry about having cancer, but I'm not, because I'm given extra time to be helpful and to do things. And so as dire, and now if things change and I may lose some cognitive abilities and I may become the angry old man, but until that point, I'm going to be as grateful as I can, as positive as I can, to help others, which also gets at your point, because I'm sure you're probably familiar with the nut butter product that's used in the hunger community globally. Are you familiar with the paste, the peanut butter product?
No, what do I know? What is it?
That's used as food aid.
Okay, I'll look at it.
In developing
look it up.
countries, it basically comes in like a ketchup packet, and you squirt it in like our MRE for military, and this circles back to this whole issue of processed foods. Food aid. You think of food aid, what is it? It's freaking processed food. Yet it does a miraculous thing in sustaining the life of people. I guarantee you there are people in Ukraine right now who wish they had processed food and who would benefit from it. And yet we have people that, we shouldn't have that. They need to be eating salad or whatever. I'm like, that, and I hope I'm not disrespecting what's going on over there. That's not my intent. But my intent is we need to address the needs we can address with the tools that we have available.
Bingo, nailed it. And you know what's really, you don't even need to look geographically past across the globe. You just need to look 200 years in the back, or 300 years, or throughout human evolution, throughout our history. We are here because we thought this would be a good idea. Anybody beyond like 400, 500 years of human history, through millions of years, this would be heaven for them. Yep. Oh, I have food I can eat anytime I want. It's not going to decay. It tastes like the best food on the planet. People need to just step back and think about that. That is what heaven would have been. We've created it. It is a moment to appreciate what we have done in the past. And we need to continue improving that. That should be the goal. And I think that the consumers need to ask people who are in charge over here, scientists or people who are making policies, ask them, we need better processed foods. We don't need no processed food. We want things that work, things that are good, and better versions of that. That should be the goal right now. And more people start doing that, we can actually create a steamroll effect. We can create better science. And then, you know what you can do? Here's what's interesting. A lot of perhaps maybe you can disagree or push me out of this one, but a lot of pharmaceutical drugs that are life-saving utilize concepts that exist within food when it comes to delivery as well. So what if we can do the same with food? We can make superfood, like literally superfood beyond just the label, you know? And so that's what I see is as a realm of possibilities, endless possibilities. When you first go to a different planet, you're not going to be right away creating, a beautiful farm land of some sort with cows roaming around. You will have to transition slowly and surely. So what I'm trying to depict over here to the listeners is a vision. And I don't want to see people suffer. I don't want to see people struggle with diseases, with cancer even. Like, that was one of the things that brought me to the ketogenic diet in the first place, was I was listening to Dr. D'Agostino's podcast on Tim Ferriss, where he talks a little bit about the ketogenic diet and cancer. We've actually covered this topic over here as well. Even though we have covered it, I'm not even going to talk about it because, like I said, that is so complicated and way above my mind and pay grade. So, no, this is fantastic. And I'm glad that your prognosis has been positive in that regards. And you're right. Death could be at anybody's doorstep anytime. So what we can do is, before we end up 6 feet under, let's leave the world beautiful 6 feet above. Because this chain continues. Anything else we can cover over here, or have we kind of destroyed all the domains and left pearls of wisdom everywhere?
I guess the viewers and listeners may have some questions or comments that may bring us back together in the future. So maybe we'll leave it at that and let the community hash out what we discussed and push back or add on.
No, this is great. You were one of the people I really looked forward to talking to for like 2-3 years. I was like, this guy's too famous. He's not going to show up to our podcast. But I really appreciate that. And I'm really happy that you've made progress. You've evolved. You've gained a lot of wisdom. I can tell, like, we're connecting on a very deeper level here. So let's continue the conversation. Let's change the world. And if you have anything for me, let me know. If you have any messages, you're welcome to say them, but you're welcome to plug where people can find you.
So you can find me. So I still have a Facebook presence. I'm getting more. So I used to be a department head. I used to be administrative. So I'm coming back to a faculty level, and so I'm getting more involved. And much like you in this, so the situation I am is I'm trying to be more educational, and I do have an extension appointment now, a small one, which extension, for those that may not know, it's a way that land-grant universities engage with the community. And so figuring out ways to better engage with the community about health topics, things like this. And so Professor Haub's Diet Experiment is the Facebook. I'm on Twitter, Haub KSU, or Haubcast, which is kind of the audio-visual side of things. And then YouTube, I just started a YouTube channel to vlog and talk about things, and that's Mark Haub as well. So anyway, so I'm open to talking. I like to talk about this stuff to help people. And it helps me too, helps me learn. Our discussion brought me to kind of your products and considering ways to better help people meet nutritional needs. And that's kind of one of my key goals is to connect those two things.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show. And thanks everybody for checking it out as well. And that's it. Thank you for listening to the show. You can visit us at ketogeek.com to check out our premium keto-friendly and low-carb food products, including our infamous energy pods, made from the best ingredients we could find in the entire country. We also recommend signing up for our newsletter at ketogeek.com/signup, where you get exclusive discounts, rewards, product announcements, and the latest content we are working on. You also get a 10% discount on your entire order when you sign up. Go to ketogeek.com/signup to join the low-carb playground.